writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business, coming to you from Kobo's headquarters in Toronto.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. I'm Stephanie, and today we have Laura Crenshaw debut on the Kobo Writing Life podcast.
Very, very dramatic.
It has to be dramatic. So you've probably seen Tara lurking around conferences for Kobo Writing Life.
I do nothing but lurk.
Yeah, so give us the deets about your job.
I'm the author experience manager for Kobo Writing Life. I used to work with you directly.
You did?
In the publisher operations. Worked on Kobo Writing Life basically since it began. And now my focus is on sort of like getting the word out there through conferences, and then also like optimizing the website, making sure it's the best self-pub website it can be.
Which it is. I'm not biased at all. So today's episode, we talked to the creator, Laura Crenshaw of Mythulu Creation Cards, which Tara actually met her at.
I met her at Superstars Writing Seminar, which is a seminar that's put on by Kevin J. Anderson every year in Colorado Springs. And this year was my first year going, and Laura was there and offered a demo of the cards, and I thought it was super interesting and that our listeners would benefit from sort of knowing about it.
So the cards, they were created for authors, I think that's safe to say.
Yeah.
But can be used for any person who's creative and works with stories.
They were saying it could be for like game designers or authors, and I think anyone that's maybe hitting a bit of a rut, like I don't want to say writer's block, but maybe like a creativity block.
Or you're looking for new ideas.
Exactly.
So then the idea is that there's six sections of the cards that someone can pick out of, and then there's different elements that you're selecting that can help your story along.
There's like characters and traits. Like Laura goes into much more detail, but yeah, that it's sort of like that you would take a card, and not that you necessarily have to keep the one card, but sort of try and find the card that speaks to you the most, and then maybe that would influence the creativity part of your brain that was sleeping.
Yeah, trigger something.
Exactly.
Help you explore something new. But we also talked to her about her business. This is a relatively new business for her. It just launched in September last year. And she talked about how this business has actually affected her writing over the year with learning new stuff.
Like how she was a writer and came up with this idea, and then like the whole process of it has like not changed her writing, but sort of influeed it more than she would have thought.
Yeah, we also learn more about the creative process behind creating the cards, because it's an 18-month deal.
Yeah.
But a lot more to look forward to. So without further ado, here is the interview. Thank you, Laura, for joining us on the Kobo Writing Life podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And so just before we begin, can you tell our listeners a bit about yourself? And then also, have you always known you wanted to be a writer?
Well, that's an easy question. Yes. And always is kind of a funny term. But I remember distinctively deciding when I was 9 that writing is what I wanted to do. And it was kind of Harry Potter that got me started with reading, I think. I remember Harry Potter being the first book that I read where I was like, oh, this is what reading's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think more than that, I had already kind of had a love for stories. My sister is an incredibly talented storyteller, and she was since we were very little. And she had an imaginary friend that was a dragon. And she's like 5 years older than me, I think. And when we were kids, she told me, I was all of 4 years old, so it was fair for me to believe her. But she told me that when we dreamed at night, we would go real places, and that she had the magic to kind of like direct where we went. And so at night, I would fall asleep kind of telling her about the dreams that I'd had the night before, and then she would tell me about the dreams that she had had. And I would fall asleep to her telling me about her dreams, and so I would dream about whatever she told me about. And the next night we would do it again, and she would kind of weave whatever I told her I had dreamt about, she would weave that into the dreams that she had had. And we shared dreams like that for years, from the time that I was 4 until about 14. When she left for college, this was just like a just for fun nightly ritual that we did together. And that kind of kickstarted my love of storytelling and my love of deep and evocative and personal imagination. So when I think by the time I was like 9, 10, 11, I kind of knew by then that it wasn't real, but it was still fun to pretend it was.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of transitioned from like play pretend to, hey, why don't we write this down? Because other people might enjoy reading it too.
Nice.
So
did you write together?
It's a good question. I don't think we've ever like typed into the same collaborative document. We kind of have this agreement where like one of us will have an idea and then we decide who is going to run with it. So one of us lays the egg and the other person sits on it. And it's kind of funny because I think a lot of the ideas that she has initially, I will be super enchanted by, and I'm the one who like runs with the story long term. And an idea that I had is the one that's like the first book that she has written and gone all the way with. So
you're both writers. Ooh.
Yeah, she's a mother right now. She's raising 5 kids, and so she
wow.
yeah, she's less available for the writing than I am. I do not have any children yet, so yeah. But anyway, so that's kind of how I got started with writing and a love of storytelling. More recently, I have finished a degree in business entrepreneurship at Arizona State University because I had faith in my writing skills and not faith in my business skills, and I wanted to avoid the starving part of the artist profession.
Good idea.
It's been the perfect segue into what you've created, like being the mastermind behind Mythulu creation cards.
Yeah.
So for anyone that's unfamiliar with them, can you give us a bit of an outline of what they are and how they're used?
So Mythulu Creation Cards is a deck, got 150 cards in it, separated into 6 categories. And we were looking for the basic like elements of storytelling, kind of the different things that you needed to assemble a story. So the 6 categories that we found were super important were elements, like physical substances, characters, habitats, relationships, traits, and textures. And the idea was, when you go to write a story, you kind of have this heart and soul of the story that you're shooting for, that you want to tell, and along the way you have sideline details that you have to fill in. And what those details are doesn't necessarily matter, but they have to be interesting. And those sideline details, kind of the world that you put your heart and soul in, makes the difference between people saying, "Oh, I've seen this before," or "Wow, that's so fresh, that's like really different." So I created these cards because I saw a Kickstarter one day. Somebody said that they had made a writing tarot deck, and I was really interested in the idea, and I went and I looked at it, and I was super disappointed because it was clearly just a classic tarot deck that someone had slapped the word writing on top of. But I couldn't get it out of my head for like the next 2 days. It just like really stuck in my brain. And I finally sat down and I was like, okay, what did I think this was? And if I made it, what would I want it to be? So instead of going to classic tarot, I went and I looked at literary archetypes. So I went and I studied the research. I think I started with Joseph Campbell and then just felt like there were a lot of characters that were missing and started kind of expounding on that. And my friend Juliet saw the dozen or so Post-it notes that were scattered on my desk and somehow figured out what the hell I was trying to do. When I came to work the next day and there were like 30 Post-it notes just had exploded across my desk, and she had started to like breach into these other categories of storytelling, not just characters, but like storytelling facets generally. So I think over the next month or so, we spent a lot of time debating what it was that went into a story and like trying to isolate down to the most basic elements. So anyway, so they're used now for, I will use them for filling in a story, but there have been a lot of surprises along the way. My brother Calvin, who's done the graphic design for the cards, loves using them to challenge himself. He'll have assumptions about his story, and whenever he feels himself starting to run with a stereotype or a cliche too hard, he'll go to the cards and he'll try to replace it. So the cards can be used for breaking out of writer's block. They can be used for deepening your story and adding layers of introspection and personal experience to whatever you're writing. And beyond writing, we've had a lot of people who've started using them for other kinds of storytelling. The conference I was at this last weekend was a gaming convention because GMs love using these for creating campaigns. We've had improv artists come by and pick up decks, painters, artists, architects, fashion designers, anybody who wants to tell a story and add a narrative element to their art can use these to, to kind of reach out beyond their immediate assumptions and circumstances and consider things they haven't thought about in a while.
Nice. Do you find that you use them with your own writing at all, or are you you're so familiar with the deck now that you're like not using it yourself?
That's a very good question, actually. And the answer is both. I use these heavily in my writing, and the fact that I have used the cards as well as thought very carefully about the descriptions in them has changed the way I write generally. So I have a project that I'm working on. After playing with the prototypes of these cards for 18 months, I forced myself to sit down and try writing a project without using them. And I discovered something very interesting. And that was, I used to sit down so the example I have is I was making a library for the opening scene of this story. And normally that's the sort of thing where I'd be like, okay, I need an interesting building, let me randomize for it. And then, kind of take the elements that come up and reverse engineer symbolism for the story that way. And this time I was like, I can't use the cards, but the way that I think about symbolism in story has changed. So instead of coming up with the physical materials and then deciding on the symbolism, I started with the symbolism. I asked myself, what's the vibe that I want? What do I need this library to symbolize? And why would my characters come? What kind of library would my characters even be going to? And I needed a place that symbolized both affluence and loneliness. And using those elements, I was like, okay, well, if I'm trying to create an affluent, lonely feel, I need a place that is in a modern library that's big, that's made out of exotic materials. And I was able to tailor fit the symbolism that I want, tailor fit the visuals to match the symbolism of my story. So that's something that's really fun that the cards are able to do if you spend time studying the archetypes that are in them, is that it will change the way you think about symbolism in stories and make it so you have to say less and you can let more of the tactile details of your story carry the deeper meanings of what you want to say, kind of like master writers have been doing for hundreds of years.
Yes, and I really liked that the different categories that you have for these cards, because when I looked at the deck, I sort of saw it as a great means of like picking a character and then getting like different descriptions of like they live in this place.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of maybe breaking down one specific area to just use it as trying to get some sort of inspiration for something that you're looking for specifically. Do you find that there's specific examples that authors use the cards for, or is it just basically different depending on the story?
What do you mean by specific examples of what they use the cards for? Are you saying like...
Is it mostly to try to find like the villain or like some sort of trait for here or completely a story in a brand new world?
Well, the categories that we have chosen, we chose because they are principles of human experience and human interaction. We were looking in every category, we wanted things that were actionable, that encouraged conflict, and focused on the human experience and applied across all genres. So the fascinating thing about setting it up that way is that you can literally randomize anything. And that's been one of our goals, is to make sure that when people come to me with a question, I can always find an answer to it. So I have used these cards to generate everything from, backstories and characters and plot and motives to isolating very specific details of burial rites and religion and weaponry. They've even been useful for nonfiction writers, which really surprised me because we crafted them to randomize and fill in fictional details. So theoretically, we thought like this shouldn't be useful at all for anything where the facts are set. But on each card, you have 3 different prompts. You have the picture, you have the title, and you have the flavor text. And we were hoping as we curated the art, that the art in particular would cause people to reflect on their own personal experiences. Because that's always where the best art comes from, is where people are taking things that they personally understand and know about and have strong feelings about and putting that in their story. So what will happen is sometimes we'll have a nonfiction writer who wants to come to us with a memoir. We had a teacher this last weekend come and she was telling us about a nonfiction book she was writing about recommendations for how to be a teacher. It was literally a self-help book. It's not even narrative. And she drew one card just to kind of like see if we could jog some personal memories that may be relevant to that category. She drew one card and she went off for like 15 minutes about, I think the card she drew was Tangled, and it just had some ropes on it, and it reminded her of living in Alaska by the sea and how that relationship between the sea and the environment changed the goals of the students in the classrooms and just created a very humble environment where even the teachers There weren't a lot of teachers. They weren't necessarily the best at what they did. And she herself wasn't even very good at math. But when there's only 4 teachers, you have to learn. So it was really fascinating to see the application even in areas that we hadn't intended it for.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you see any room for sort of expansion of beyond the 6 categories that you have, or would you?
Absolutely. No, we have at least 3,000 cards planned in expansion packs already.
You guys are going to be really busy.
Yeah. We're almost done curating the art for Starter Pack B. We've decided to wait to release Starter Pack B until we've sold our first 500 units of Starter Pack A. But yeah, we've already released a Dialogue Boosters deck on our app. And we have, let's see, what are some of the expansion packs we have planned? We have a bunch of genre-specific decks, so romance, horror, steampunk, slice of life.
Slice of life? What's that?
What's the slice of life?
Oh, so slice of life is a very interesting genre. It's popular in anime. And the thing that's interesting to me about the genre decks is that when you're telling a great story, there are always elements of multiple genres in it. So any good fantasy story is going to have not just fantasy, but also romance and some horror. And slice of life was interesting to me. It's a genre that can be very stagnant. It can be a very indulgent way to write a story as a writer if you're not careful, where you just kind of meander around like character studies, but your story doesn't actually go anywhere and it doesn't mean anything. But there are some masterful slice of life stories out there that identify, I guess, elements of the human experience and the moments where we kind of pedal, we spin our wheels a little bit as humans, but it's kind of where life matters anyway. So a good example of that, it's the card that we've come up with is rituals. And it's like where you have a ritual that everyone is kind of sick of, but nobody wants to let go of. Like Christmas, I think, is a good example of that. Where, we go through the rituals and sometimes we beat our head against the wall and we're like, why are we doing this again? Do we even have the magic of Christmas anymore? But nobody wants to skip Christmas. So slice of life can be very powerful as we've been trying to identify those super intimate human experiences that don't necessarily progress plot, but do deepen the sense of just existing and being glad to be alive. And so people in our prototype decks, as we're play testing these, people will use these slice of life moments to deepen scenes in normal stories, in sci-fi and fantasy. You have these moments where you're like, okay, well, I have a great fight scene here, but it's not impacting my audience. It doesn't feel familiar or personal or meaningful. And they can pull a slice of life card and suddenly have a story about Christmas on the battle lines.
You briefly talked about an app that you launched. Yes. So can the app be used by itself, or is it more of a tool used with the cards already?
The app can be used by itself. So our goal as a company is to really encourage a renaissance of better storytelling. We want to rid the world of remakes. And
that's a bold statement now that I think about it.
Well, like now that we're like all of the movies are remakes and everything now, so it's
all of the movies are remakes. Yeah. And people have been complaining about that for 50 years. They've been complaining that nobody makes anything new in movies for 50 years. So we really want to move the world into a renaissance of deeper, more interesting, and more original storytelling. And so we thought about it long and hard, and we decided that we wanted the content of the cards to be available to everyone, regardless of whether or not they can put down $45 for Starter Pack A. So we have released the app to make the power of the storytelling experience of the cards available to anyone for free. So Starter Pack A, all 150 cards are available on our app, both Android and iOS right now. It's a little bit clunkier of an experience just because it's on the phone. It's kind of a limited size and you're constrained to a grid of 8 cards. And when you're working with the physical cards, there's a lot more fluidity and you can draw a lot more cards than 8 cards. But the app and the physical cards both kind of have different advantages. I like using the app at 2 a.m. when I have a story idea hit me and I don't want to crawl out of bed. We also have expanded commentary that we're working on for every card, and that is in the app. So they're kind of designed to be tools that work together. It's a really good initial introduction to the cards for people who don't have the physical cards yet. But people who do have the physical cards find that the app is very useful as just kind of an augmentation to increase the ease of use of the cards and provide some tools for brainstorming and thinking more deeply when they're stuck on a particular card.
Cool. And switching gears to the business side a little bit, you said like you have a background in like entrepreneurial studies and business things.
Yeah.
Is there anything that surprised you through the creation of this that you didn't anticipate? Like, was it an easy, like, was it once you had your idea, that was it, like, and ran away with it? Or was there a lot more planning involved?
There was a lot of planning. I had a class, and the whole point of the class was to get out and talk to your users face to face, which is a surprisingly hard thing to do as an entrepreneur. You kind of have this pet idea that comes to you, and it's easy to get so busy nurturing and creating this thing that you forget to go and ask people if it's what they even want. So early on, we were probably halfway done with the production of the cards. And a lot of entrepreneurs will have an idea in a realm where they don't have a lot of personal experience. I think part of why the idea turned out so close to how I originally conceived it was I am a writer. That's my profession. So I'm deeply experienced in the personal aspects of this already. But there were still some things that surprised me. I remember believing that people probably already had a pretty good idea what plot they wanted, and that the things that they would use the cards for were probably super petty sideline details, mostly cosmetic. And I went to a gaming convention and interviewed about 30 people, including a lot of professional game designers and professional novelists. And there were two things that blew my mind. The first one was people frequently were totally lost on plot. They had no idea where they wanted their story to go. They had some small snippet of an idea that wasn't a full story on its own, and they were trying to expand it, but they didn't know how. And they needed help understanding just the elements of human interactions a little bit better. They needed ways to draw from the cards in ways that they could use to develop plot if they needed it. So that idea has sparked plans for an expansion deck that, actually for multiple expansion decks that are geared towards plot progression. So we're working on those. The other thing that really shocked me, though, and even made me angry, I talked with some of these professional, like full-time professional writers that told me they didn't believe there was such a thing as an original idea. And they would act on this in a way. There was this guy who told me that when he sat down to write a story, he would go to a book he liked and he would rip out the beats, so the action-reaction moments of a story. He would literally copy the actions of the characters, and he would replace the cosmetic details in the story, and he would publish that as his own work.
I don't like that at all.
No.
I was livid. I was like, and he was just like, he felt like it was the only way to write a story, and it blew my mind.
You're not even really writing a story at that place. You're just
you're not.
a story.
But I encountered this multiple times from people who weren't even interacting with each other on a professional level, which I don't know. I went back to my teacher and I ranted. I was like, I cannot believe that people do this. So yeah, there have been surprises, and there continue to be surprises, and even though we've launched Starter Pack A now, I'm always encouraging people to please come to me with their feedback and their experience. And I put these cards down in front of people all the time, and I just sit back and I watch them without giving any input. I'll ask questions from time to time, because everybody surprises me at least a little bit in some way, and I intend to keep going back and revising these cards. I already have several changes that I want to make to Starter Pack A when we reprint it. But I think, I don't know. So your original question was, were there surprises, and how did my entrepreneurial training change that? Was that your question?
Yeah, just sort of like how did that help prepare you for having a business? Like, or just do you have advice for people that are sort of starting their own business?
Well, that's an interesting question, because if you want to be a writer, you are starting a business.
Yeah, especially in this self-publishing game, like you're the business person, like you're owning that brand. Yeah,
well, and even if you are traditionally published, traditional publishers expect you to be heavily involved in the marketing aspect. And it's one of the factors that they take into consideration in the traditional publishing world with whether or not they're even interested in picking you up, is how willing you are to participate in marketing. So yes, I do have advice for people who are interested in starting a business. And I think the first and most important element of starting a business is you have to stay in touch with your customers. People will sometimes really get up in arms. It's a very purist ideal to be like, no, I'm writing for me. But you're not. You never were and you never will. If you're not connecting with your readers, you're failing. Yes, there's something beautiful that you want to convey that is very personal about the writing experience. And you want to make sure that you're getting across, because whatever it is that's precious to you, there's a way to convey it to someone else in a way that will be precious to them as well. And you need to make sure that you're staying in touch with them and humble enough to put aside some of your ideals to make sure that you're creating something that's even desirable and in alignment with what other humans are experiencing.
That's really valuable advice.
But that's been happening a lot of authors being like, your readers are expecting something of you that you should be considering.
And I find that my entrepreneurship training made me a better writer, which was something I was not expecting at all. Oh, yes. While I was in this class that was about customer experience and getting out and talking to people, it occurred to me that it might apply to writing. So I went to my mom and I was like, hey, Mom, why do you're a mother. You've bought thousands of books for us as kids. What factors do you choose when you're picking a book? What makes you want a book for your children? And if you're looking for a very good skill to develop as both an entrepreneur and a writer, it's the ability to learn to ask questions where you can learn about the kind of experience people want without actually telling them anything at all about what you're intending to make, which is a hard thing to do. So you ask elements about their writing experience. So for example, when I was creating these cards and I went to this convention to interview people, I actually didn't tell them about the cards at all. I sat down and I said, hey, where do you get stuck when you sit down to write a story? What's hard for you? What do you do about that? Like, how do you try to fix that? What works? What doesn't? And I would just kind of ask questions about the experience that I was hoping to fix. And I walked away with this wealth of ideas that I wouldn't have had if I'd just gone to them and said, hey, I'm looking at making these cards. Tell me what you think. So I did that with my mother. And I said, I'm interested in writing sci-fi for young adults. Or I knew that I was interested in writing some sci-fi story for young adults, but I wanted to understand why she was picking stories at all. And her brain went to historical fiction. And she said that she loved buying books for her kids that would actually teach them elements of history. And she wished that stories included more of like an index in the back that created a final chart of this is what was real, this is where the author kind of took some liberties. And that sparked an idea that I had. I was like, oh my gosh, like I've never seen that for sci-fi for young adults, where, what if there was a little index in the back that said these are real scientific principles, you can learn more about them over here, and these are things I just made up. So that was one example that I had of like how going and talking to my customers sparked an idea that ultimately doesn't change the story that I want to tell at all, but it makes the book potentially more marketable and much more valuable for a niche market of parents who want to buy books that help their children be more intelligent and more aware of the world around them.
I think it's hard to think of a story as a product, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. And as a buyer, I'm just like, it is a product, but it's a weird way of thinking of a book that you love.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I don't know. I think the first class I ever went to in college, I had this weird professor who looked like Einstein, and he was just totally crazy, but a delight to be around. And the only thing that I remember taking away from his class was he wrote on the chalkboard in big letters, it was up there all semester, only connect. I think he was quoting some other writer like E.E. Cummings or something, but only connect. That was the one thing he wanted to drill into our heads, was that if you write something and you fail to connect, you lose. Your writing has failed. But if you do write something and it doesn't even necessarily like preach a moral or like change your reader in any way, but you've succeeded in like reaching out and like having a shared human experience with your reader, like you've succeeded. Which was very interesting to me. At the time, I was writing a very indulgent piece that was very much a personal essay, and it wasn't until years later that I came to deeply appreciate what he was trying to convey there. But it's made me stop. What that made me realize is that I am never the exception to the rule. You know, it's easy to be like, to look at the rules of storytelling and be like, oh yeah, I understand that brevity is important, but under these circumstances. And like, no, there's always a way to reconcile what it is that you're trying to do with the rule that you're breaking. And I think that when you force yourself to work within the constraints of both your target and what it takes to connect with other people, that's where the best writing comes from, for sure.
Given that you have worked with a lot of elements of the story and done research into basically the history of stories at this point, do you have any writing advice that you always turn to helping you with your work?
Interesting. Well, yes. Given that writing is about connecting with other human beings, I tell people, if you want to be a better writer, you have to be a better person. And you need to be seeking to be a better person on a regular basis and doing the work that it takes to expand yourself. Because at the end of the day, whatever your biases are, whatever your weaknesses are socially, those will come to the surface in your storytelling. The stories that you write are a thesis of the way you look at the world. If you have problems internally with the way that you're looking at the people around you, if you are racist, if you are bigoted, if you are shallow, if you are afraid to reach out and try new things, or you're looking down at one group or another for any reason, that will come out in your stories, and you will repulse some readers at least a little bit. And so I encourage people to look hard internally at what they're afraid of and what they're avoiding, and to seek out experiences that challenge that. I think that's at least as valuable, if not more valuable, than any of the studying of the writing craft that you can do. Craft is certainly important, but if you have a story that has a beautiful soul and mediocre craft, you can still get across much more, and something much more beautiful than if you have a story with impeccable craft and a terrible soul.
That's good advice.
Yeah, I think that readers can maybe read the soul of the story.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's good advice.
They can. The story makes it through even when there are grammatical errors and, you know, cliche world building. The soul of the story is what matters in the end.
Nice. And if our listeners want to get themselves a copy of these cards or the apps, like where are they available?
So the apps are available on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. You can also, those are the two places to download it. The cards are available on both Amazon and on our website, mythulu.com. And hopefully you will start to see us around at more conventions. We just launched in September, so we're a tiny little baby company making tiny little baby steps right now. But we're starting to get out there at some of the conventions and trying to get the word out that way. So yeah, but the best places to buy it online are Amazon or our website, and the apps are available on both major app stores.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to come and be able to, to have a place where I can talk about what I'm passionate about and my philosophies about story. So it's fun.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So we hope you'd enjoyed our interview with Laura. Make sure to check out the blog because we will have links to her creation cards over on there if you're interested in buying them or taking a look. They're very beautiful.
Yeah, we'll include a couple of snippets.
We hope you enjoyed Tara's debut as well.
Yep, never coming back. I'll be back.
You'll be back every week.
It's a nice little payback because, not payback, but I've been using Stephanie's voice for our tutorial videos that are available on our YouTube channel. But we also put the podcasts up there. So if YouTube is your flavor, then you can find that stuff there too.
Yeah, YouTube's always fun. And then next week we will have an interview with Sasha Black. She's going to talk to us about how to create a compelling villain.
Ooh.
So I'm very interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening.
drop us some stars. We want some star ratings, please. Rate, review, subscribe anywhere you get your podcast.
Thank you so much, and until next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we provide insights and stories from leaders and experimenters in the world of self-publishing. If you want even more information about growing your Kobo sales, check out our blog or find us on social. And if you're just finding us and ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!